We are honored to host this event here at the UN office in Geneva during the 58th Human Rights Council session. Climate change is more than an environmental crisis, it is a human rights issue. Around the world, vulnerable communities, particularly indigenous peoples and rural populations, bear the brunt of climate impact while having contributed the least to the crisis. At the same time, climate activists face increasing repression, most notably during COP29 in Azerbaijan, where widespread crackdowns on independent activists, media and human rights defenders led to imprisonment and severe restrictions, undermining the multilateral nature of the conference. With civic space shrinking and threats to activist safety growing, it is more urgent than ever to address these challenges. As we look ahead of COP30 in Brazil, we must advocate for stronger protections and more inclusive policies that uphold both climate justice and human rights. Today's panel includes climate activist at Green and Better World, Chanceline, human rights activist at the Institute for Human Rights in Wien, Earth Justice representative to the UN office in Geneva, and coordinator at the Europe-Brazil office, Alir. Without further delay, I am pleased to introduce you to our first speaker, Chanceline, who highlighted that climate change is not just an environmental issue, but a human rights crisis. Chanceline, the floor is yours.
Climate change is not just an environmental issue, but also a social and ethical one. It recognizes that climate change disproportionately affects marginalized and vulnerable communities, especially in Global South, while wealthier nations and corporations are responsible for most of the greenhouse gas emissions. The countries and communities that contribute the least to climate change often suffer the most. Climate justice demands that wealthier nations, corporations, and polluters take responsibility and provide support to affected communities. Climate change threatens basic human rights like access to clean water, food, shelter, and health. Indigenous people, low-income communities, and marginalized groups are often excluded from climate decisions but are the most impacted. Developed nations and big polluters should pay for the damage they have caused through funding, debt relief, and climate adaptation program. Climate justice advocates for policy like the loss and damage funds to support affected nations. Inclusive decisions making. Affected communities must be included in climate policies and solutions. Local knowledge and indigenous wisdom should be respected in climate adaptation efforts. Sustainable solutions should not just reduce emissions, but also protect human rights and jobs. Human rights are the basic rights and freedom that belongs to every person, regardless of nationality, race, gender, religion, or any other status. They are based on principles of dignity, equality, and respect, and they apply to everyone, everywhere. They apply to all people, regardless of differences. They cannot be taken away, except in specific legal cases. The right to life and security, freedom of speech, religion, and assembly, right to vote and participate in governance, freedom from torture and discrimination, economic, social, and cultural rights, right to education, right to health care, right to work and fair wages, right to food, water, and housing, environmental and developmental rights, right to a clean and healthy environment, right to development and fair resources use. Human rights protect individuals from oppression, discrimination, and injustice. They ensure that people can live with dignity, freedom, and opportunities for a better future. Human rights violations linked to climate change, displays leading to loss of land and livelihood, water shortages causing conflict, increased poverty and inequality, governance, and corporate accountability issues. Green and Better World is campaigning for policies and actions that address climate change and promote environmental justice. Firstly, we are advocating for the protection of vulnerable communities, especially in regions like Africa, where climate change disproportionately affect marginalized groups. We are campaigning to promote clean energy sources like solar, wind, like what the Association of Linux Friends is doing in Limbe, Cameroon. Also, we are advocating for reduced fossil fuel, strikers emission policy, and invest in an investment in sustainable alternative, campaigning against deforestation and illegal logging, encouraging deforestation, afforestation, and sustainable land use, protecting endangered species and ecosystem, promoting climate resilient farming techniques, advocating for policies that support small-scale farmers, fighting against land grabbing and destructive agribusiness practices, holding big corporations accountable for environmental destruction and pollution, encouraging businesses to adopt sustainable practices, promoting green jobs and eco-friendly industry. Educating communities about climate change and how they can take action, advocating for climate education in schools and universities, pushing government to commit to international climate agreement like the Paris Agreement, advocating for stronger climate laws and their enforcement, calling for climate reparations and financial support for affected countries. Advocating for reduced pollution will lead to healthier community. Planting trees and protecting natural resources will improve biodiversity and climate resilience. Encouraging recycling and waste reduction keeps community clean. Cutting emission lower cases of respiratory illnesses like asthma. Protecting water sources ensures safe drinking water. Encouraging plant-based or local food consumption will improve health. Educating people about climate change help them take decisions. Providing knowledge on renewable energy, permaculture, and eco-friendly businesses empowers community. Informing citizens about climate policy help them demand action from leaders. Fighting for fair policies ensures marginalized groups are not left behind, helping community prepare for climate-related diseases. Save life. Uniting people around climate issues strengthen local leadership and cooperation. Thanks for your attention.
Thank you very much. So now that we have addressed this critical issue, let's shift our focus to COPs, the key international forums for climate change and human rights. To start, let's discuss the previous COP29 held in Azerbaijan. So Emin, could you please elaborate on how this conference addressed or failed to address these concerns? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Isabella. Thank you for Green and Better World organize this event, and thanks for all our speakers and guests. As you know, COP29 recently happened in Azerbaijan, November 2024, and we tried to raise awareness with issues with human rights and climate actions during the COP29. We start and launch campaign. We create partnership, which is named Climate Observer Partnership, and we try to engage with stakeholders and talking about climate actions and human rights. Unfortunately, what we have in Azerbaijan today, it's a very dramatic situation. During the COP, ahead COP29, government already started increasing repressions against civil society institutions. Hundreds of political prisoners jailed. If before COP29 we have 100 political prisoners, during the COP29 and closer to COP29 we already have 300 political prisoners, and today we have more than 360 political prisoners, because right after COP29 the government of Azerbaijan continued repress environmental defenders, human rights activists, political opposition representative, and representative of investigative media community. So this is clear issues for us why it's happened. Because Azerbaijan tried to, and President Alir tried to use this global event for greenwash himself, to create better positive image, and unfortunately during the COP29, as many international media already published stories on issues how Azerbaijan used COP29 for sign new extractive industry contracts with global players. It shows for Azerbaijan don't have any kind of ideas to defend our planet and make better for everyone world. They try to just whitewash themselves. And unfortunately for this COP29, our calculation shows for government of Azerbaijan spent more than 350 million euro for organizing this event. It's like a quite huge amount for even for oil-rich Azerbaijan. When people live in the poverties, when anyone who asks for his fundamental social and political right jailed, what we get, which kind of benefit COP delivered to us, I can clearly say nothing. Only pain, only problems, only repressions, increased repressions against independent voices. And unfortunately, right now, when Azerbaijan have a COP29 presidency until COP30 in Brazil, until this November, our presidency is supposed to continue, no one already talking about climate action and human rights. It's understandable. We are not naive. Current global trends with Mr. Trump and his administrations and other right-wing governments, they are already not happy about this kind of environmental talks. But the issues with Azerbaijan is still Azerbaijan is present in the UN climate change program, and nobody able to even ask or raise awareness. And thanks for all our colleagues for such great opportunity. We're able to at least raise awareness during the Human Rights Council here. And sometimes our colleagues, like, we're not able to attend even to COP29 in Baku because serious risk assessment shows for it can be problem for us. Some of our colleagues from Climate of Justice Coalition already jailed. I'm trying to name, let's say, for Anar Mamadli, who participated on same side event last year on 15th of March 2024. He is arrested right after when he returned back to Azerbaijan. And another member of this coalition, Bashir Süleymanlı, he is arrested just few weeks ago. And again, I don't able to mention all of the names, but just like what we are trying to specially raise, we have more than 40 journalists who expose environmental problems in Azerbaijan, who investigate extractive industry problems, and unfortunately we're not able to defend them because world forget about them, and they're supposed to be not forgotten. So we try to ask for more solidarity for Azerbaijani critical voices, for environmental defenders and journalists. And I would like to stop here. And
thank you very much. So now let's delve deeper into the specific of the COP and the role in addressing global climate challenges. Our speaker today, Eve, will provide valuable insights into the outcome, success, and shortcomings related to these critical international forums, particularly in relation to human rights and climate action. So the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And thank you very much, and thank you for having me at this important event. And indeed, it reminds the event we had earlier last year, where Amar was with us here on the table, and now he's still in jail. So this kind of retaliation is quite problematic. And we have to be very careful in the way we deal with these issues, in the sense that we must not go from one COP to the other and forget what happened before. So I'd like to remind that in COP28, which happened in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt, we also had an issue, slightly different in the sense that at that time, the movements and the claims for human rights defenders was larger, just not on the question of the COP. Although during COP, it seems that a number of demonstrations or activities which happen in the country have been repressed, and we still have people today who are detained because of what they did during the COP. But of course, there was a huge push to call for the release of Alaa Abdel Fattah, a very well-known political prisoner defended by the Human Rights Organization, and who was one of the leading figures of the demonstration on Place Tahrir. Actually, he was supposed to be released on the 29th September last year, 2024. But as the Egyptian authorities decided not to include the pre-trial detention, which you usually count when you do the full count of your detention time, then now the release is pushed to 2027. So because of that, last fall, his mother, Leila Souyef, began a daily hunger strike outside of the UK government's Foreign Office in Westminster. And she was joined earlier this year, mid-January, by the Australian journalist Peter Greste, who himself had been imprisoned in Egypt with Abdel Fattah in 2013. And he joined her in a hunger strike. Now, unfortunately, she had to be hospitalized because of these hunger strike. And so now that has led this month Abdel Fattah to begin a second phase of his own hunger strike. So we are really very, very worried about their fate of both of them, but mainly for Alaa Abdel Fattah, because he's still in detention. And we see that we cannot just go on from one COP to the other and start to pile up the big numbers of people who are detained in these countries while we're talking about climate change. And we heard very well by the first intervention how much climate change is a human rights issue. So here we definitely have an issue. There's a bit of a good news, although it's not as good as we would like it to be, but if we see what has happened during this session of the Human Rights Council, there was a joint statement that was delivered by Colombia in the name of Costa Rica, Panama, and a cross-regional group of more than 25 countries, which is really great, talking about precisely how the issue of climate change here in the Human Rights Council addresses the needs and interests of future generation and their ability to enjoy all human rights, including the right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment. And this joint statement has been calling all countries, but of course the Human Rights Council, to reinforce a human rights-based approach to mitigation and adaptation, and to minimize address of loss and damage in line with the international climate framework. So here, clearly, we're reminding everybody that you have to work on both of these elements, the international human rights framework and the international climate framework together. Of course, this joint statement was really focusing on a very specific point that will need to be discussed next June, on the inclusion of fossil fuel in the resolutions on climate change, which unfortunately has not been the case so far. There was a second joint statement, which was delivered at the interactive dialogue with the Special Rapporteur on the right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment, Mrs. Astrid Puentes. And that was actually, this joint statement was built on a similar joint statement that had happened in September, in line of COP29, and unfortunately, we just heard what happened. But in this joint statement that was read by Costa Rica on behalf of a cross-regional group of more than 40 countries, it reminded that environmental human rights defenders, including those who are protecting the ocean, of course, because that was the main discussion this year, are among the most at-risk human rights defenders in the world. And that actually you do have a number on the front line of defenders. You have a number of women and girls who are actually active, and we forget about these specificities, in isolated or remote location. And we see, as it was reminded in the joint statement, that this type of work too often brings to extrajudicial killings, arbitrary detention, and criminalization. I'm quoting here. So the call is really for the Council to step up its effort to better protect and empower environmental human rights detention, and also that these environmental human rights defenders can safely participate in all UN fora, including International Environmental Conference on Ocean Protection. Of course, here we think about UNOC 3 in Nice in June, biodiversity and climate change, including, and that was clearly stated, including COP30 in Brazil. So this is a quite important call for the next COP. And the final element I'd like to underline, which is going to come in the coming days, is the adoption of what is now draft resolution L26 on the right to a clean, healthy and sustainable environment, on the ocean and human rights, where it is recalling the very important resolution 4011 of 2019, which underlines the important and legitimate role played by human rights defenders in promoting human rights, and reminding that when we talk about people working in this field, we also call them environmental human rights defenders, environmental human rights defenders, recalling also that this includes the guiding principle on business and human rights. And then finally, in the operative part, saying that states are called to promote a safe and enabling environment for all of these defenders, and it recognizes also the important role played by individuals and civil society organizations as well as human rights defenders in the protection of human rights and the protection of the right to a healthy and sustainable environment. So I think these are very important elements. Of course, for the resolution I just mentioned, L26, the draft resolution L26, we have to see what will come out in the coming days. But we are still very hopeful that this language will be adopted and will be adopted without a vote. So these are important elements to have in mind when we will think about the next COP30 in Brazil. Of course, this is a new context, but it also brings new challenges. And I'm looking forward to hear what Paulo has to say.
Thank you very much, Yves, for highlighting the critical challenges and the urgency of addressing the intersection between human rights and climate change. So now, as we approach COP30, Paulo, could you please share your thoughts and key details about the region at the upcoming conference? Thank you very much. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the opportunity of being on a very important topic. Brazil will be hosting COP30 in the city of Belém. Belém is the capital city of the Pará state, one of the states in the Brazilian legal Amazon. Brazil has been one of the leading countries negotiating environmental agreements since the early 90s, when the country got back to its democracy. So one of our landmarks was Rio 92, and Brazil also has been a key player in other negotiations. But this doesn't come out of problems. So this Brazilian leadership is not problem-free, as we're going to show some of the contrasts on all those dealings. Brazil has a big, or at least an important presence in the global, financing for the environment. So Brazil and Brazilian projects, they participate. Brazil is both recipient and donor since 2023 with the new democratic government of President Lula. There were around 26 projects approved, amounting to roughly $800 million. But at the same time, indigenous leaders, traditional communities, they claim that they haven't been consulted on how these projects will be spent or allocated. If we consider, and this is true, that the indigenous peoples, traditional communities, they are agents of change. So there are questions on whether this financing has, been allocated directly to climate projects or only to pay expensive consultants in capitals. Also, there is also a growing concern on indigenous peoples and traditional communities on carbon credit and marking. So there is a growing refusal, on this issue. At the same time, Brazilian public banks, they are big funders of degradation projects. So one of the biggest beneficiaries of Brazilian public money is the agribusiness. So the agro-industrial sector is responsible for nearly 20% of the Brazilian GDP. You know? Although there are interesting initiatives, for example, the moratorium of planting soybean in the Amazon. We have other drastic situations, for example, the widespread utilization of pesticide, including pesticide being used as a weapon of war, as the Inter-American Commission of Human Rights has stated in the case of the Guararocá indigenous community. Pará state is not free from that. I think also from a global territorial perspective, still the marco temporal in Brazil, it's a legal thesis violating international human rights standards. So this mistaken thesis defines that there is a restriction on the claims for traditional lands is persistent in Brazil. Although the Supreme Court in 2023 declared this marco temporal unconstitutional, the most conservative Congress in history of Brazil enacted the marco temporal, you know, against the ruling of the Supreme Court. At the same time, the Supreme Court reopened the case for some mysterious consultations, so they are sort of flexibilizing underogable rights. And until last week, they tried, for example, to insert mining rights in indigenous lands, which is forbidden. Also, Brazil's goals for carbon emission reduction, they have been considered relatively or very modest, you know, from 59 to 67% until 2035, compared to the levels of 2005. So according to specialists, this is not at all compatible with the minimum reduction of 1.5%. Brazil took also, the Brazilian Democratic Government took a long time to appoint the climate authority at the federal level. It did it at the later stage of last year. We have also good aspects. For the first time in 5 centuries, Brazil has established a first Ministry of Indigenous Rights, led by Sônia Guajajara, a renowned indigenous leader. The Ministry of Environment also, she's a recognized environmentalist who is very courageous, Maria Silva, but with race to the bottom worldwide on raw materials, on increasing agricultural production. These ministries, they face from within also the government serious challenges, including in budgeting. Also, Brazil faces some challenges in adapting its international norms through its federal structure. It has been historically difficult for the federal government to implement at the state and municipal level international standards. Of course, there are also threats, retaliations, and already recognized cases of reprisals, mostly against those who fight for land. But I think I will be happy to discuss it probably in the next stage. So thank you.
Thank you very much. So now as we approach the end, I just had some questions to further develop our discussion of today. So I would like to start with Jean-Guy. So given the ongoing barriers such as visa restrictions, lack of funding, and high cost that continue to underrepresent the frontline communities in international climate forums, How can we ensure that climate justice efforts truly reflect the voices and leadership of those most affected?
The grassroots people should be included in policies and solutions to represent themselves and to speak their minds. Grassroots people have difficulties to get visas to attend conferences, seminars, meetings internationally. So these grassroots people should have the opportunity to get this visa on time, attend the meetings, explain their difficulties, and say what they have in their mind for a better community. These grassroots people, they also lack funding, visa fees, transportations, hotel, feeding. They lack all this funding to be able to participate in conferences and say what is in their mind. So this is what I think about grassroots people. Thank you.
So now I just have another question for Eve. So as we approach the next Human Rights Council session in June, how do you predict the international community will respond to the ongoing human rights challenges at COP, particularly the restrictions on climate defenders and the exclusion of frontline communities?
Thank you. Well, in the coming months, we have three steps which will be important. The next session of the Human Rights Council, Human Rights Council 59, and the next meetings of the subsidiary bodies of the UN Conference on Climate Change. Now, unfortunately, both of these events will happen exactly during the same weeks. They start the same weeks. The Human Rights Council is longer than the subsidiary bodies, but they start the same one in Geneva for the Council and in Bonn for the subsidiary bodies. So that's not the best situation in order to have an exchange between these elements. So we're going to have to push a lot before we have these two events to make sure that they are correctly on the table and that they will discuss in a coordinated way between the two places. Because indeed, what has just been said about the participation of civil society, we have two levels of problem. One is at the general level. What has been described is what we've been facing, lack of funding, difficulties to get the visa and so on, for almost all of the COPs now over the last years. It's a general trend. Unfortunately now, and the question is that Brazil should really be an opportunity not to miss, because here, after the difficulties we had over the last COPs, it's a good time to put the COPs on their right track. And so, especially when we're facing right now from some big power a denial of reality, so it's very, very important that the conference is not parasited or disturbed by a lack of proper organization and a lack of proper participation. And so we have now, on the top of what has been just described, a new challenge, which is to see in a small place like Belém, how will we be able to all participate? One of the very first things we need is to have the host agreement being published. This is something which has been asked again and again over the last COPs in order to understand how the agreement has been passed between the UNFCCC Secretariat, the UN, and the host country. We need to be able to read it. And unfortunately, this is still a challenge which is not met in the preparatory process. So here we think Brazil can play a leading role in saying, yes, we will publish it once it is signed. It is still under negotiation as far as I know, but once it's public, we must see it. And of course, it must include full protection for all of the people who are participating and never have retaliation as the one we've had for COP29. Now,
led to any clear information to pursue the remedies from violation. And it is very frequent that environmental defenders and indigenous leaders coming back from UN meetings, they are victims of reprisals when they go back to their territories. I mean, they come back already from what you call land reclaim, which is a very dangerous environment. We're seeing with very much worrying the formation of armed private militias that were responsible already in 2025 for several assassinations of human rights defenders. So Brazil, there is still an open opportunity not to be missed.
Thank you. And just last question to Emin. So, how do you see the president of Azerbaijan's leadership influencing the country's future approach to human rights, especially in the light of the criticisms raised during COP29? Thank you.
I think the role of the president of Azerbaijan, it's clear. He's person number one who's responsible for all crackdown. And as I'm mentioning before, he's not person who is responsible or being responsible for climate action and being like a champion, climate champion, because he find like COP29 as like useful tools for himself. And right now he's completely changed his mind. And again, when he see he doing everything what Trump administration start to do. For example, when Trump administration said for USAID, it's criminal organizations, corrupt organization, the same rhetoric started in Azerbaijan, and all grantees which is received funding from USAID punished by the Azerbaijani General Prosecutor Office. So, which is clear signal. Alir today not trying to be climate champion. He tried to be ally with authoritarian leaders like Putin, Lukashenko, and others. And he's tried to use momentum and do his vendetta plan against the civil society, because he's just recently in Baku Global Forum said during the COP29 many NGOs, and most of them get funds from USAID and State Department of US. They start blackmailing campaign against Azerbaijan and President of Azerbaijan. And again, today is just like using momentum to completely destroy civil society. And already what we have today, all independent media outlets closed. Excel-based media outlet, which is operated somehow during the COP29 in Azerbaijan, they are also seriously damaged because all of their staff members in Azerbaijan jailed. Imagine like we have 3 leading Excel-based media, which is each of them have from 7 to 8 jailed journalists. Now, in Azerbaijan, government not jailed by just one by one. They arrested journalists as like organizing crime group members with different politically fabricated charges. And again, the role and leadership of Azerbaijan responsible for this, like especially President Aliyev and his ruling regime.
So thank you very much, Emin, and thank you to all the speakers of today's important side event. So we just have some minutes left, so I now open the floor to any questions, remarks, statements. So feel free to raise your hands, and I will give you the floor. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Amy Powniller from UNESCO International Bureau of Education. Thank you very much for the very important panel today. I'm just interested to know, as an organization or as organizations, how far do you work with the education sector or other sectors in order to raise the very important issue of climate justice cross-sectorally? Do you work with formal education systems or informal education systems, for example?
Thank you very much. Would some of you like to answer?
I like to answer.
Yeah.
You can.
Yes, you can first.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the question. My name is Ngaiko Chanslin. I'm from the Association of Linux Friends in Cameroon, and in Linux Friends, we use the solar system. With the solar system is renewable energy. We use it to power raspberry computers. And with these raspberry computers, we can train people from the grassroots without depending on energy from the states, and it's very economical. We also live by the seashore. We always organize ourselves and we go by the seashore and we clean it. We get the plastics out of the place. And we educate the young people who come to this, our training center, who come to learn informatics, the importance to keep the seashore clean. This, they know it very well. At the moment, we have a friend from Switzerland. His name is Patrick. He supports us with a recycling machine for plastic because we have a lot of plastic that is littered around the seashore. And he's going there to train the young people how to use this machine to recycle the plastic that are littered around the Atlantic Ocean in Limbe. Thank you very much. I think this one is important.
Thank you very much. Well, first, I mean, representing a legal organization, we don't work directly with teachers and so on. But the NGO movement, which is behind and working in the framework of the UNFCCC, has a very important educational component. It has also very, very important youth groups. They are extremely active. So you do have educational activities, information activities for the public in large. You do have a number of these organizations working on that. I'm not from that field, but we do work very much closely. We have constant coordinations when we're working in the preparation of the COPs and during the COPs themselves. Now, the only thing I can say for Earth Justice itself is that we are working, because you were mentioning UNESCO, we are working closely with a number of communities in the field who are directly linked to the World Heritage sites. And so we are closely working with them. So we do have this connection with UNESCO, but not in the educational sector.
Yeah, just a very brief comment on that. I come from an educational background from Paulo Freire in Brazil, and I think it is very much adapted today to, decolonization of so many issues. So those in the front lines of defenders, indigenous peoples, traditional community, they are responsible for nearly the protection of 80% of our biomes. So I think we should not only having them participating actively, but learning from them. So there is so much to be learned. So in this regard, I think we should have bigger ears and probably smaller mouths, just this drop of information.
Sorry, just one point I should have mentioned right from the start is that within the UNFCCC, you have a very important program which is called ACE, Action for Climate Empowerment. That's an important sector of the activities in this field. And definitely, in here you have a very, very strong NGO involvement in the negotiation, in the decision, and in the implementation. So you do have a part of the work done by the UNFCCC, which is devoted to education and information. Sorry, I should have said that right from the start. Apologies.
So thank you. So we still have some time left if you have some questions, remarks. No, if not, if the speakers, would like to
I can add something with the issues of environmental education. I think in country where is critical mind under pressure, we can't able to say for it's possible to really develop any kind of real true environmental educational programs, because especially in countries which is totally and their economy absolutely dependent with extractive industrial business. And if we analyze which kind of journalists today in Azerbaijan they are arrested. Most of these journalists doing like media literacy job, which is also part of informal education, because educational system in Azerbaijan completely damaged. They are only educated one thing, cult of personality of the president and his family. So, and when any kind of critical thinking not appreciated by the ruling regime, role of the media literacy is important. But unfortunately today it's difficult to continue to properly educate people and increase their critical thinking when huge number of journalists jailed. That's why I believe government of Azerbaijan and other governments should create free and safe environment for the journalists, media, and other stakeholders like bloggers, etc. Anyone who is able to contribute for educational process, formal and informal. And thanks again for these questions. And
So thank you. Still have 5 minutes. So if you have some questions or remarks.
I have one remark. I have a questions to Eve and to Paul. Because what we observe in the COP system, governments create this troika mechanism, and they're engaging with each other, and what we observe how the government of Azerbaijan established this troika mechanism with Egyptian presidency and United Arab Emirates presidency when they tried to justify all of this criticism, when Ali is saying for everyone from the same groups also criticize United Arab Emirates or Egypt. What we can do as like a civil society before COP30 in Brazil, and especially with the Brazilian NGO community, how are we able to increase our voices? Maybe we would like to hear it.
Well, as I've said, some of the events which are really important coming up will be the meeting of the subsidiary bodies in Bonn, where we can raise a number of these issues directly with the Secretariat. So that's really a moment which is quite important. And then, of course, what will be done here in the Human Rights Council. The Special Rapporteur on Human Rights and Climate Change will attend both. I don't know how she'll be able to manage because it's going to be pretty difficult, but she will. She has clearly said that she will be attending these two events. So these are moments and places where we can discuss that. But of course, I mean, I think it's extremely important, and that's why I'm so happy to be here on the panel with Paulo. It's very, very important that we coordinate with the organization in Brazil, and of course, he has much more to say about that.
Yeah, no, thanks. There are vivid discussions in many sectors of civil society in Brazil, with expectations and also many concerns on how the preparations and the COP will unfold. So I'm really happy to sit with you on a later moment so that we can engage and make this synthesis of past, present, and future. It would be really great to integrate in that.
Okay, so thank you very much. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for our speakers, and we wish you a wonderful day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Not first.